This week's video is a complete makeover of an IKEA Hemnes dresser. I've been wanting to do this makeover for a long time, so I was really excited to get started. I'm going to duplicate a Pottery Barn dresser. I know I'll have some challenges to overcome, but I have no doubt that the end result will be fantastic. Watch the video to see the full transformation from a boring IKEA dresser to a $2,100 Pottery Barn dresser. I'm using a new IKEA dresser for this makeover, so the first thing I had to do was put it together, and since it was new, I didn't have to clean it. The top was not installed until I cut down the top so that the edge would be flush with the sides. I used a table saw to cut about 1 inch off all around the top. The top was then installed. I wanted texture on the drawer fronts as well as the dresser itself, so I used an upholstery fabric with a woven texture. I cut the fabric so I had about an extra inch on all sides. A steam iron was then used to get out any wrinkles. To adhere the fabric to the dresser and the drawers, I applied a thick coating of heavy-duty Mod Podge with a chip brush. The fabric was placed on the drawer, and then I rolled an unused container of Mod Podge over the entire surface from one end to the next to ensure there were no air bubbles trapped between the fabric and the wood. I checked the edges to make certain they were glued down well and added more Mod Podge as needed. I immediately applied a thick coat of Mod Podge over the top. When I applied it, I brushed it in both directions so the Mod Podge would soak into every fiber of the woven fabric. After the material dried overnight on the drawer, I used a single-edge razor blade to carefully cut the fabric flush with the edge of the drawer front. The razor blade made the cut clean and straight. I then tested the edges by pulling up on them to see if they were securely glued down. I re-glued the edges with Mod Podge and then put an additional coat of Mod Podge over the top about 1 inch from the edge of the drawer. In hindsight, I should have put another coat over the entire top because this coat, when dried, left a shine in the area where it was applied. Later, after this coat was dried, I applied another coat over the entire top of the dresser drawer so the shine was no longer visible. I'm going to let the video roll now so you can see how I applied the Mod Podge to the sides of the dresser. I also applied it in the same way to the top.
Don't take it personal, I ain't lying, I ain't hiding, I've been grinding, multiplying, I've been trying to get my weight up, staying prayed up, meditating and taking time away. You always posting up pictures, trying to look like you winning. I'm writing rhymes in the kitchen, soaking in moments we live in, yeah. You got the nerve to be on me, faking your life for the IG. If you got my number, don't add me, cause baby, I'm on hiatus. I'm on hiatus. I'm on hiatus. I'm on hiatus. Baby, don't check for me. Taking time out to be and live my life off screen. Taking time out to be and live my life. Hey. Taking just so deep and live my life. Don't take it personal, we just building. It's my season, lay foundation, make a name for generations, please, and make a, then take a break or a little vacation and chasing blues away. Hey, hey. You always posting up pictures, trying to look like you winning, or look like you always be working, soaking the moments you live in, yeah. You got the nerve to be on me, faking your life for the IG. If you got my number, don't add me, cause baby, I'm on hiatus. I'm on hiatus.
The following day, when the Mod Podge was completely dry, I ran my hand over the surface and it felt very coarse. It felt like there were pins sticking out of the fabric. So I used 100 grit sandpaper to lightly sand the surface of the fabric on the entire dresser to remove these sharp edges. The fabric continued to have a lot of texture even after I sanded it lightly. The dresser's now ready for paint. I gave a lot of thought to the paint that I would use on this dresser. If I used chalk paint, I'd have to apply a sealer, and that would fill in the texture on the fabric. If I used wax over the chalk paint, the wax would also fill in the texture and would probably attract dust. So I thought the perfect paint would be an all-in-one paint, since it would not require a sealer, and it's very durable. I've tested a variety of all-in-one paints and have found that my DIY all-in-one paint is just as good, if not better, than most commercial brands of all-in-one paint. So I made my own all-in-one paint by using latex paint with primer and a water-based polyurethane. The link to my recipe is in the video description. The quality of the latex paint you use does matter, and I have found that Ovation Plus paint from Lowe's in a satin or flat finish works absolutely perfectly. I had it tinted black for this project. There's also a link to all the supplies used in this project in the description. Feel free to ask me any questions in the comments section. I enjoy hearing from you, and I try to respond to all comments. After I ran the vacuum over the surface to remove any dust, I applied one coat of the all-in-one paint using a brush. I brushed the paint in both directions to ensure I got paint within the fibers of the cloth. Since I was painting heavily textured fabric, it seemed like I used more paint than normal. I also painted any area that was not covered with fabric.
As a young girl, the fields were mine. We played hide and seek for hours, raised our shadows among the pines. So offshore, playful and free, without a care in the world. I was one rich little girl, daydreamer, kidnap me, take me back, all the way back to them days, running around in a gown and a crown, barefoot. No mistake ever kept me late. We spent summers catching fireflies and winters on our skates. One big smile across my face. We used to dance our way to church on Sundays. Mama set the pace. Daydreamer, kidnap me, take me back, all the way back to them days, running around in a gown and a crown, barefoot.
While the paint was drying, I began to cut the trim that would turn this dresser into a trunk. I used 1 by 3 by 8 foot furring strips. I examined each board to find the best side and the best edge and labeled it as such. Some of the edges were jagged. Since I planned to cut the boards down, this jagged edge would be cut off. I used a table saw to cut the trim that would be placed on the front of the dresser 2 1/8 inches wide. The strips for the two sides were cut to 1 5/8 inches wide, so that when assembled, each side would be 2 1/8 inches wide. I then used a miter saw to cut 45-degree miter cuts at each corner. I left each board a little bit longer than necessary so I could sneak up on the miter and remove small amounts until I got all the corners tight. Immediately before installing the trim boards, I sanded all of the sides that would be exposed using an orbital sander and 180 grit sandpaper. I started on the 4 pieces of trim that would be placed on the front of the dresser. The front pieces would overlap the side pieces of the trim. The top trim to the dresser would overlap the top front piece of the trim. I placed all 4 pieces on the front and trimmed each piece as necessary with the miter saw until I had tight-fitting corners and everything was square. I glued each piece in place with weld bond glue and then adjusted each board to confirm its placement. I placed the side trim behind the front trim to make certain the front trim would hide it and the two would form a perfect corner. I used 2 clamps to hold this side trim in place to ensure proper placement of the front board while I nailed it in place with a brad nailer. Technically, the brad nails simply held the trim in place until the glue could dry.
You got something I can never be without, yeah. I'm in your command. Thought I was a man of my own will. It's been 2 years. I'm only a shadow of the good on me now. A breeze in my ear. Cause you know I cannot say no to you. Feeling like home. But should it be like this? Locked up in your dome, you know I fight for you. What do I do? Every time you call my name, what do I do? You're whipping me into madness. I try to lay low, but I can never stay away from you. What do I we can't stop it, so I keep on rolling in silence. So I keep on rolling in silence. I find myself apologizing when you've started it. Why? Under a spell. I really wonder how did it come to this? Go see my friends, but then I realize they're all your friends. Is this who I am? You see me running around in circles, feeling so sweet, but should it be like this? I'm loving the heat, I think I'm losing it. What do I do? Every time you call my name, what do I You're whipping me into madness. I try to lay low, but I can never stay away from you. What do I we can't stop it, so I keep on rolling in silence. So I keep on rolling in silence.
I installed the top trim so it overlapped the front and side trim pieces. I glued the top to these 2 side pieces and front pieces along the edge and used clamps to ensure a tight, permanent fit. A piece of screen molding was cut and placed over the wood that separates the drawers on the front. This trim was glued in place and secured with masking tape until it was dry. Using an orbital sander, I then sanded all of the trim with 180 grit sandpaper to ensure that everything was flat and flush. Since I was going to stain this trim, I wanted to be certain to use stainable wood filler. After a lot of research, I tested Timbermate water-based wood filler. It seemed to take stain well, so I used this to fill in any holes or gaps in the trim. Timbermate is a product from Australia, so I send out a big hello to all my Aussie viewers. When the wood filler was dry, I sanded the trim one last time. Since I was using pine trim and pine doesn't take stain evenly, I applied a pre-stain wood conditioner. I wiped off the excess according to the manufacturer's instructions, and when the conditioner was dry, I lightly sanded the trim to remove any grain raised by the wood conditioner. All sanding dust was removed with a damp cloth, and I applied a coat of Varathane 3X dark walnut wood stain using a car washing sponge to all the trim. The stain was wiped off immediately with a paper towel.
Come on over, let's pick up where we left off. You and I had lots of love just to top it off. We can wind it down for days, never let it stop. I just want your everything, baby. Maybe later we can dance, never let go. Listen to our favorite songs on the radio. Losing up and lose ourselves to this feeling. Oh, I just want your everything, baby. I'll be deep under your influence tonight. Ooh, keep it coming, babe. I don't mind another round. Drinking from your bottle, baby. Calling it wasted love, wasted love. I can't get enough of my baby. I'ma be wasted love, wasted love. I'm spilling liquor on the carpet, on the couch. I feel it dripping from my mouth. Drinking from your bottle, baby. Calling it wasted love, wasted love. Moon is rising and the stars are coming out. But we miss it cause we're way down on the ground. Ain't nobody interrupting if we decide. I just need a night with you, baby. Yeah. Then we be blinded by the lights, oh. We get this feeling, oh so right, oh. I'm so over being sober, you're all I know. I just need a night with you. Drinking from your bottle, baby. Calling it wasted love, wasted love. I can't get enough of my baby. I'ma be
With all the sanding, the linen was looking pretty dirty at this point. I had anticipated this, and that's why I waited until now to give it a second coat of all-in-one paint. The drawer pulls I purchased were glossy black, so I spray painted them flat black. I also purchased some corner protectors and trunk corners that were brass colored. But when I put these on the dresser, I thought they were simply too shiny, so I spray painted them flat black as well. I used screen molding to resemble the cross straps on the trunk. These were cut to shape with a miter saw, sanded, stained, and when dry, given 2 coats of water-based polyurethane. They were glued in place with weld bond, as shown, and then secured with bright brass upholstery tacks. With all the upholstery tacks and trim pieces installed, I was finished with this project. However, when I stood back and looked at it, it just looked too new. What do you think? Give me your opinion in the comments below. Of course, if you're going to duplicate this piece and you like it, you could stop here. The Pottery Barn piece has a black glaze on the wood and metal edging to make it look aged. I just knew that's what this dresser needed. So I made a custom glaze by combining 1/4 cup of glaze with 1 teaspoon of black chalk paint and applied it with a sponge. The next day, I applied a second coat of black tinted glaze to the entire dresser. I only applied it to the wood parts, of course. The last step was to apply 2 more coats of water-based polyurethane to all the wood to ensure the glaze would not come off. Now the dresser was finished to my satisfaction. I started with a basic Chemney's all-pine IKEA dresser. What do you think? Does it resemble a Pottery Barn dresser? I even put fabric on the back like the Pottery Barn dresser. I'm pleased with this IKEA hack and have already found a place for it in my own home. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps my channel a lot because it tells YouTube that this video is of value and others would benefit too. If you become a subscriber and click the notification bell, you'll be the first one notified when I post my weekly videos. In fact, it's free to subscribe. I certainly appreciate all the support great viewers like you have shown my little channel. I enjoy reading your words of encouragement in the comments, and it's very motivating that you appreciate what I do. On the right, you'll see several videos that provide additional information about how to refinish, restore, and restyle furniture so you can flip it for a profit or refinish it for your personal use. Thanks for watching.